proudly brought to you by the Nigerian Economic Summit Group.
Hello and the warmest welcome to the 17th Nigerian Economic Summit. We're coming to you from Abuja, Nigeria. It's the presidential roundtable where the president is having an interface with distinguished international global CEOs here to discuss the state of the Nigerian economy, the prospects, the opportunities, the challenges, a frank conversation about how to articulate Nigeria's Vision 2020 to become a G20 economy by the year 2020. We know of all the problems. We've dealt with them before. It's infrastructure, it's human capital, it's skills, it's mobilizing domestic investment. But the momentum is great for Nigeria. The sentiment is positive for Nigeria. The credit ratings are favorable for bringing financing into Nigeria. The transformation agenda is firmly underway. The reforms are having a great impact, particularly in banking and in the capital markets, and investors are hungry to do business. So what we're going to be doing here at the Nigerian Economic Summit is finding out what could be done better and where those opportunities that lie off the beaten track actually exist. It's a conversation of leaders, but I'm not alone as Lerato Mbele. I'm also joined by Sarah Maka. She's with the Tony Elumelu Foundation, and she's going to be giving us also a domestic or a localized perspective of what's going on in Nigeria alongside an esteemed list of other panelists. So Sarah, over to you.
Thanks, Lerato. As Lerato mentioned, there are opportunities in Nigeria. The 17th Nigerian Economic Summit talks about partnership, and partnership is a symbiotic relationship where the investors, local and international, interface with the public sector. So today we're here to have, indeed, a candid conversation about moving this partnership that drives foreign direct investment to Nigeria forward.
All right, I'd like to introduce to you our panelists. Seated furthest to my right is Zumi Kobayashi. She's CEO of the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency of the World Bank. She's going to help us understand how to manage risk, particularly financing risk as investors bring their capital and money into Nigeria. Next to her is Jay Ireland. He's president of General Electric for Africa. He's going to be speaking to us about the huge infrastructure deficit, and of course, as the Nigerian authorities with the Sovereign Wealth Fund and other mechanisms to finance infrastructure help us understand how we can direct the money and the capital better. Seated next to him is somebody who actually needs absolutely no introduction. It's Alhaji Aliko Dangote, probably Africa's foremost industrialist. He's president of the Dangote Industries Group, and he's going to be giving us his understanding of how to do business in this thriving economy. Seated next to me is somebody who needs absolutely no introduction. It is His Excellency Goodluck Jonathan, the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, and I thank you so much for having been here with us today. He is absolutely the Chief of Staff, effectively the man in charge, and we're going to be finding out from him. Sarah Maka, you've met. Next to her is Ian Craig. He's Executive Vice President for Shell in Sub-Saharan Africa. As we know that Nigeria is the largest exporter of crude oil in Africa, the 8th largest the world over. So a lot of investments are going to be directed in this sector, particularly if we get closure and conclusion on the petroleum industry bill in the country. Daniel Zeliko is the head of JP Morgan, and I thank you for being here with us. You're going to help us understand how fund managers and how prospective investors could be driving their investments into Nigeria. And last but certainly not least is Paul Hinks. He's CEO of Symbion Power, and again speaking to us about addressing some of these infrastructure issues, particularly with the president having really been forthright on this whole question of the power sector and energy reforms. This debate is structured into three components, and the first of those is going to be political risk and political stability. Mr. President, ahead of the summit, the world was a little bit angst. We've heard very menacing, threatening statements from Boko Haram. We've seen them in action. And there is a sense that even if the economic opportunities exist in Nigeria, the society is still fragmented. It's still a society of a lot of disenfranchised individuals, and that creates huge political risks. It's a major impediment. What are you doing about it?
Thank you. The issue of Boko Haram that we're experiencing today in Nigeria is not new globally. Most countries of the world have experienced terrorist attack. You are very much aware of the days of IRA in England. Of course, the country moved ahead. These are temporary challenges we have that definitely will get over it. And let me reassure Nigerians, and indeed the world in general, that even with the limited technology we have, the Nigerian security services have done fairly well. I look at the experience when we had the first serious terrorist attack when we celebrated our 50 years anniversary, 1st October 2010, and there were bomb explosions. All the people that were involved in that terrorist attack have been arrested and have been prosecuted. Most other countries that are even more sophisticated than us have not got into that fit. Yes, we have the Boko Haram challenge now, but just like terrorist attacks in other parts of the globe, we are working on it. Well, we have the recent worst case in 2 states, in the northern part of it, but we are working on it. And you really see that even during that attack, quite a number of them were arrested, some of them even died during the cross-firing. So it's not as if the security services are not doing much or the government is not doing much. But people normally will expect to live in peace, because one major function of government is to ensure security of life and property. That is the primary responsibility of government. And any government that cannot provide that, then of course you have challenges. So we're working very hard. We meet regularly. And I can assure Nigerians and I can assure the global community that it's temporary setback and we'll get over it.
Okay, Sarah? And Mr. President, we look around the room and we see people here in spite of the previous threats. So we understand that Nigerians are very resilient people. And you've mentioned that you communicate about what's going on with the security issues. The question is, for global potential partners looking at Nigeria through headlines, what message do you take to them that in spite of the headlines, Nigeria is still open for business?
Of course, you know, even countries that have civil wars, people invest. Nigeria experienced 30-month civil war, but even within that period, people invest. Anybody who does not want to come and invest in Nigeria now because of these incidents of Boko Haram will really regret it, because this is very, very temporary. And if you look at from even before I was inaugurated, the kind of engagement we've been having, we are focusing seriously on significant changes and reform in our economic sector. A number of things will have to do it differently. And so if people begin to think that Nigeria will continue to be where people will manufacture things everywhere and come and dump, I think the days of dumping is almost going. I will advise people, luckily we have global players here, I will advise them to look at the economy and see areas where they will come and invest. We also have challenges in terms of power. For security, there's no country that is completely safe. Even as robust as America is, they don't sleep. They monitor, they watch. It's just that terrorist activities are new in Nigeria. We have challenges of occasional assassination and armed robbery. And those are the kind of crimes that we are dealing with. This terrorism is new. And we are acquiring the relevant infrastructure to combat it. And I assure you that it will soon, you cannot completely say you are wiping out terrorism, because even the countries that have developed technologies cannot completely say that the security services are sleeping. No, they are on their toes. So that is what we are doing now.
Okay. Izumi Kobayashi, political risk, security issues, how does the international community truly view Nigeria from a risk perspective?
I think that's, of course, for the investors, private sector investors, they care about the political risk. But first, the concern is that the staff security. So first of all, the staff security is one of the biggest issues. And then the political risk. The political risk is that basically the political risk is trust to the government. And trust to the government does not mean only that the top level of the government, the officials, but also that the working level, the all government, the people need to understand the top level of the vision and need to understand the meaning of each policies to be able to communicate and affect to the investors. So in terms of the political risk to Nigeria, I think that it's improving, but I think that honestly, there is the uncertainty exists.
Jerry Island, how do you define risk? Because we can define it in political terms, we can define it in investment terms. It could be that your biggest challenge in Nigeria is the currency, it could be the infrastructure, it's not the politics. How do you define it?
Well, I think those are good points. When you look at from an investment perspective, the aspect of risk is a number of different variables. And from our perspective, the other aspect is it's always riskier when you're looking from outside in because you don't understand what's going on inside. And I think that's one of the aspects of having local operations with people, and you can really judge what the real feel is from a standpoint of all, whether it's political, security, investment. And so our view is to really take all of it as we look at investments, and you balance that with opportunity. And there's the risk versus opportunity, and when that equation doesn't work, you don't invest. When it works, you do invest. And we have operations around the globe. We've been in Iraq for the last 5 years operating. And as one of the riskier places. So we view it from that aspect of a balance, and we feel good about Nigeria.
Mr. Dangote, you have a truly local perspective, and you understand risk, you understand the situation in Nigeria and abroad. You have gone to 11 countries on the continent. Share with our local and our international investors what your perception of political stability in Nigeria is and what it takes to generate the returns that Mr. Craig talked about.
Thank you very much. At least if you look at it, since 1999, we've had a stable democracy, which, can be seen, and we had the previous election this year. And if you look at it in terms of perception, yes, perception has not really been, fair to Nigeria because the benefits are there. And sometimes maybe people are really just a bit lazy to go out and find out what are these issues, because somebody can just go and put up this, okay, fine, just like what Mr. President said earlier on. You're talking about the BRICS. Are you saying that security is okay in Brazil? I know that somebody like me today, for example, if you come on a weekend in Lagos, I drive myself and I go up and about. And they are all global investors. They know that somebody who even bears my name will not be able to drive a car in Brazil. He has to go by helicopter. That's why Brazil, that's true. Brazil, with respect to them, I'm just comparing, So if you look at it in terms of security, we're actually not really that bad at all. Iraq had an investors forum in London 3 months ago, and actually the place was overbooked. There were even no seats. We went with about 8 people, but they only allowed 4 of us to enter. So if you look at it, you now look at the benefits. What are these benefits in Nigeria when you invest in Nigeria? You are not only talking about Nigeria's market, you're talking about the ECOWAS market. Because whatever you're going to produce, you'll produce it much, much cheaper in Nigeria than other ECOWAS countries. And we have, common market, which means I can produce goods in Nigeria, export, and none of those countries, actually give export incentives like Nigeria. So, the benefits are there. The population of 150 million people, 167 now, okay, and is growing at about 3%. And then you have the other ECOWAS market, which is 140. So you have over 300 million people. So when you look at this, And I keep on saying that today, if I have $20 billion, I will invest everything in Nigeria because there are so many sectors. Okay, there are so many sectors when you look at it. For example, today, somebody say, yes, we want to go and look at doing business. Nigeria, really, if you take 3 areas, you can grow them as much as the oil, the 3 of them combined together. Agriculture can be much, much bigger than oil. Petrochemical, which we are not even doing anything about. And I'm sure, the investment climate is there. Okay, and then you're talking about the other one, which I noted down, mining. Mining industry is something that we should actually focus. And I know that there is one single product in DRC, which they export, cobalt. 3.5 years ago, they are exporting only about $300 million worth. Up to beginning of this year, they are exporting $12.6 billion. And by next February, they will double to about $24.8 billion. So you can see that opportunities are there.
Okay, we'll unravel some of those opportunities later. Still on the question of security, Ian Craig, in the petroleum sector, I mean, that's what this economy is predicated on, even though we're starting to see new avenues for growth. And in recent history, we've seen kidnappings, we know of the violence in the Niger Delta, we know of the very successful amnesty program. Are things changing from a risk perspective in this sector?
Well, over the past 2 years, there's been a massive change because of the amnesty program that's been sustained by the president. And that's allowed the industry to rebuild, allowed production to get back to previous levels. And that's good for the industry, it's good for the country. And it lays the foundation for future growth. But of course, long term, that amnesty, the peace, can only be sustained if these other sectors that we've talked about, agriculture, power, can really move forward and create the jobs that everyone looks for in the Niger Delta. But I'm confident that the industry can continue to grow from the foundations that have been laid over the past 2 years.
Okay, Daniel Zeliko, your views on this one, especially now in the turmoil that we've seen internationally. Many investors are looking for yield. They're coming to emerging markets for yield. Is Nigeria top of mind?
Well, Nigeria is definitely on the radar. Now, in our business, we really provide wholesale financial services to businesses and other clients, both from abroad as well as local. So from our perspective, if Nigeria is growing fast, that's good for our business as well. But when I think about what are the things, the risks that we look at, the first, I want to kind of come back to something that Jay Ireland said. It's local knowledge. It seems to me that that's absolutely critical. Now, who has the best local knowledge? It's Nigerians themselves. So I want to invest where Mr. Dangote is investing. He knows better than we could possibly know what are the great opportunities here. So therefore, for us, it's key to align ourselves as service providers to the best businesses in Nigeria.
Paul Haynes, why do you want to do business in Nigeria?
Well, first, let me put this into some context. In the last 8 years, most of my business focus has been in Iraq and Afghanistan. And believe me, Nigeria does not have a problem. But I have to admit that I was one of those people that the minister spoke about earlier that was perhaps scared to participate in Nigeria 20 years ago. And I could tell you how I have become interested in the Nigerian sector in the last 2 years. I sit on the board of the Corporate Council on Africa in Washington, D.C., and through that I became very exposed to a lot of Nigerian diaspora and Nigerian visitors to the US. I started to take a look at the power sector reform plan. And as I described to somebody yesterday, the quality of that work and what Nigeria was doing blew me away. As I got deeper into looking at that, and I met more of the people who were developing that in the BEP, in the ministry, PHCN, etc., I decided we must take a serious look and see if we can get involved in that process. So to be quite honest, this is my first visit to Nigeria since the early 80s when I came on a 2-day trip, and I've been here a week. I'll use the term again. I am blown away by the quality of the people.
Okay.
I'm blown away by the quality of the people I've met, both Nigerians who have grown up and stayed here, and this huge number of people that seem to have returned to support His Excellency the President in the reform plan here. So I'm going away from here hoping that this will one day become a major centre for Symbian's activities.
I echo that sentiment. A lot of Nigerians I know always look at me and say, you see, we are the real Africans. I'd like to introduce the topic of infrastructure now. Mr. President, under your watch, you've made energy a priority. You've said if that's going to be a legacy I leave for Nigeria, this is it. And so the fast tracking of the privatization of the PHCN's assets, getting this whole thing sorted out. Where are you at?
Thank you. We've gone quite far. You're quite right. Even during our campaign period, Nigerians, there were two things Nigerians really spoke about. Of course, now security is a factor. Make sure that we have free and fair election, and of course, fix power for us, leave the rest for us. And the power has been a priority of government, even before myself and the late president came on board, since Obasanjo's time. We've invested in the NIPP project and others. But the most significant thing that you ask is privatization of the discourse. I think the Bureau of Public Enterprises have gone quite far. There are a lot of interest. Nigeria is a very huge country. It's not the biggest, but very big, especially when you look at Africa. And we have areas like Lagos that the population is quite dense, Kano, areas around Enugu. So the number of interests to sort out this and insist, and I told them that, look, you must make sure that you do it transparently and that there should be no influence. Because we realized that there's some privatizations that was done by the government before were given out to people who are not too good. So you must take due diligence. One of the areas where we have the challenges, maybe like the power and steel that Dangote will talk about. Because the company that it was privatized to couldn't really run the system. And there are stories of cannibalizing and so on and so forth. We said that the power sector is a sector where we really want that kind of experience. So you must make sure you carry out due diligence on any company that is interested. It's not a company that just wants to start. It's not an area for starters. It must be a company with records of performance. And it must be people that we are very, very sure. So I think to sort out this is taking them for some time, but I believe that before the first quarter of next year, which we are lead based on our program, these issues will be sorted out.
Mr. Ireland, Mr. President says Nigeria has gone far, and power is the single most important thing for the nation, as you've said, Mr. President. What grade would you give the government on the work they've done so far?
I would say that the movement is very positive. The privatization, the IPP discussion that's been having. I think the key thing is going to be, as far as investment, is when you look at a power regime, if you will, you've got to look at the full economic picture, from what the consumers pay back to what the investors, whether they're financiers or equipment or EPCs. And there has to be an economic return for everyone within that. So I think that's going to be the big piece. But part of the discussion has got to be thought around two things. One is, when you compare prices of power from the grid, if you're a consumer, all you think about is the power from the grid, but you don't think about the diesel generator in your backyard. That's expensive. If you factor in everything, then it's a change of how you might think about it. And the other aspect, from an industrial aspect, is what's the cost of no power? That, I think, is the biggest thing, because if you have no power and it's or intermittent and you don't have security of power, it's hard to do a high-tech manufacturing. You need, you know, consistent, you can't wait for the generator to kick in. It's got to be continuous. You know, so you end up not being able to, let's say, continue to move up the manufacturing value chain from a high-tech standpoint. So the cost of no power is probably, in a country that needs it, is more overwhelming than what the cost of power is. But that's going to be the biggest thing from the standpoint of putting in the new privatization regime, is that economic value chain through the whole structure.
On this subject, some concerns have been raised because obviously, as we're seeing privatization, we're seeing lots of international bidders. So this energy sector is going to be a driver of major investments. The issue is, when we start talking about public-private partnerships, what's the benchmark that Nigeria should use? Because it is a federal government, and ultimately a lot of deals are going to be negotiated at the state level, not at the federal government level. And there are concerns that governments are paying too much when it comes to entering into these transactions. They're incurring too much of the risk, and the private sector is walking away with cash dividends and not really putting in the kind of investments that's needed. So Nigeria should have a benchmark, should have a coordinated PPP policy. What's your take on this one?
Yes, I think that is a very valid point. The really successful investment is that the win-win situation for both the government, means that the general public, and also the investors. And I understand that the power sector is a key for the growth of the economy. Not only cost for not having power, but also that the lack of the energy gives the ceilings of the economic growth, so that the government should focus on that. And definitely that, I agree that to figure out the best win-win balance of the government commitment versus the private sector investment profit. And this balance is very important, because if the investor seeks too much profit, which means that the damage for the government, and that type of business, there is an issue of sustainability. So the private sector and the government need to focus well to figure out where is the best the point of the balance.
Daniel Zedeko, Paul Hinks, between the two of you, what is a reasonable price to pay? Because when we talk Nigeria, the land of opportunity, there are those who say, I'm getting into Nigeria, I'm going to make my killing and I'm getting out of there. And that's not the kind of investment you want. And as we're undertaking these power sector reforms, there's lots of money to be made, but what's a reasonable price?
Well, I'm not going to be able to say just, off the top of my head what's the right price for power in Nigeria. But what I can say is that the price of that power is going to be affected very much by how the country manages to mitigate the risks that are in every investor's mind. There are various ways of doing that. There are international organizations like MIGA, like the IFC of the World Bank Group, that help to mitigate some of the risks. There are hedging activities to help hedge out some of the volatility that comes with the fuel stocks that go into generating power. And perhaps most fundamentally, there's kind of policy continuity that the government itself can adopt, which will take some of the investment risk out for kind of the long-term investors. I don't think anyone who's investing in infrastructure can seriously go into the situation thinking that this is going to be a quick buck. They're making a very long-term commitment to the country, and at the end of the day, large-scale infrastructure remains in the country no matter what. So the key is to partner up with infrastructure investors who have that long-term outlook and do what's within one's own power to mitigate some of the risks that the investor has to be thinking about.
To answer that, I'd probably best refer you to a power plant which we own in Dar es Salaam, East Africa, Tanzania, East Africa. There is always a lot of confusion when price of power is quoted, particularly in the newspapers, because it varies dramatically. It depends on whether you are paying for the power plant, what they call a capacity charge, or you are paying for an energy charge where you use so many cents per kilowatt, which includes the fuel cost. So the contract we have in Tanzania with the Tanzania government, or the utility there, is we are paid currently 4.99 cents to produce power using gas. Now that does not include the cost of the gas. Recently, in an effort to economize, we've done some things and we've renegotiated with the government, and we are reducing the price to 3.5 cents per kilowatt. That's unheard of. Normally the price goes the opposite direction. But we've taken, as my colleague here described, the long-term view. We don't want to be one of these independent power producers that we've all heard about that comes in and makes this killing and profiteers from poor people. So, okay.
Mr. President, business is talking. They're interested in making their investments, following the procedures, entering into the market. What do you want to say to them? What do you not want to see? Because ultimately for you, power is, it's a social issue for you. It is about the empowerment of the people, uplifting humanity. It's not about profiteering. It's not about commerce.
Well, I may not completely agree with you, because power drives so many processes. In fact, the issue of power itself is an opportunity for investors. That is why government is opening up all the sectors for the private sector to come in. We get to where we are because a number of things were monopolized by government before this time. The planning minister used to give an example of Nigerian Airways. By now, Nigerian Airways would have been one of the major airlines in Africa. But because it was purely government business, it was poorly managed, Nigeria Air collapsed. The same thing with Nigerian shipping lines. Just because of a policy, when the world was changing to container freighting, Nigeria Airways and shipping lines have to buy ships that were, and they couldn't have markets, and the shipping line collapsed. It goes on and on. Even within this period, even the laws we have now, even that controls powers, if you speak with some of the governors like Rivers State, Akwa Ibom and others that are investing significantly in power, they still have some challenges. These are the areas we are trying to sort out, to open up the whole sector for both the generation, both generation, transmission, and distribution should be managed professionally by the private sector. Though now it's the distribution and generation that has been completely privatized. We still manage transmission, but even the transmission, we have to partner with the private sector through consultancy, because we want the best. So there is business in the power, and it's an area where the private people can exploit. But you need power anywhere to make sure that you stimulate the economy, even for agriculture, even in the rural areas. I think the country, before this time, you see powers in only some cities. So the state I come from, called Bayelsa State, up to the time the state was created, there was no federal government power line. A whole state, there was no federal government power line. That shows you the level that we were. And we've moved quite far from there, and we even go beyond. But you need power for the ordinary people, for the middle class, for the top business people like Dangote. It's easier for them because we have gas. One advantage Nigeria has is that we have gas. And so for the big industrialists, it's cheaper for them to buy the gas and generate their own power. But the small and medium scale enterprises, that's why we even have the worst challenge, because they cannot invest in getting the gas and generating their own power. So power is for everything. It's not just a social issue, but it's really a big business itself.
And in addition to power, in addition to power, I know Nigeria is doing several other things with other kinds of infrastructure, the port reforms, roads. Mr. President, can you share some of the advances that we're making in other infrastructure projects?
Outside power?
Yes.
Of course. You see, Nigeria is almost, it's like a green field in terms of investment. Because before this time, there was high monopoly. Look at our seaports, our airports, the road infrastructure. There is no country, a developed country of Nigerian size, that you'll drive and you will not see toll gates where you pay money. But you don't have it in Nigeria. So even the road infrastructure, the railways, some states are now having their monorails. River State is doing it. In fact, we show what Enugu State is also doing it. These are all areas that the private sector can partner with the state government and invest. So it's not just power. We're talking about our road, we're talking about our airports, we're talking about our seaports, we're talking about, of course, telecommunication. All these areas need basic infrastructure. So it's not just power.
Mr. Dangote, final word before we go to an ad break. People say input costs, that's the killer. Operationally, the overheads are too much in Nigeria because of infrastructure issues. If you're not paying too much for power or to compensate through generators, you're paying additional costs because the roads are not good, because the rail infrastructure, all those kinds of things. How do you overcome it? For those who want to come into the market today, how do you overcome?
Well, thank you. But also going back to what His Excellency said is true. The real issue now is how to provide power to the small and medium scale industries. For us, we actually generate our own power. We generate about 450 megawatts of our own power. And I believe that, with the ports, we are also facing the same issues like any other, company. But I believe what we need to do is actually to open up that, this, which the government has actually done so. And there are a lot of concessions where you have 5 years tax-free holiday and all this. But I think having congestion is actually going to continue for a little while because, we have smaller ports right now. And the last port that was built was 1978, which was Tinkan Island Port. So there are other areas where we can build large seaports like Olokola and also Lekki Prison, which I believe the government had already signed an agreement with the company to go and build. Most of these opportunities in terms of building infrastructure, they are there, but the only problem or issues that we're having in Nigeria is that you have several of these businessmen that will just go, foreigners or even locals, that will sign up with the government and they will not execute. And that one really will slow down a lot of things. So I'm sure part of the what the government will do going forward will be now to give you a timeline of, okay, fine, if you don't start in maximum of 1 year, this thing is off. But you look at it today, why should we have free roads? We need to make sure that we have toll roads. China has 3-point-something trillion in there. When you take main China with Hong Kong, they have over 4 trillion in their bank accounts, sitting down there as reserves.
I just want to interject there. On that issue, concessioning, for instance, in roads, we've just heard Mr. President say there's just some things that must be managed by the private sector. But an asset like a road, how would it work in Nigeria? Because even if the private sector was to come in on a 30-year program with the government through a PPP and say, we'll manage it until we get our returns, we'll hand it back to the state 30 years down the line. You don't want to hand it back to a state that can't manage a public asset.
Well, I'm sure, it is over a period of time. When you build, it does not mean that the government will take it up. You can have another sort of arrangement where now you can continue to manage on their behalf in terms of on a sharing basis. So it does not mean that you will now hand it over back to the government, or the government can go and get a professional company that can run it for them. So it can work.
All right, we continue here at the 17th Nigerian Economic Summit. It's the presidential dialogue. It's a roundtable on business, foreign direct investment, and the opportunities that exist in Nigeria. Investors are bullish about Nigeria. You've heard those sentiments, but we are unraveling some of the challenges, particularly in the medium and immediate term. Long-term, Nigeria set itself on being a G20 economy, and we know that the president and his team are committed to